Have you been ignored, as if your presence were invisible to those around you? Have you ever been feeling that your voice was not important enough to be heard? For Eleanor Carter, that day seemed to be one of these moments. But what she didn't know was that her simple attempt to solve a bank error would lead her to an unexpected date that would change everything. The agency was crowded and the mood was tension. Employees walked from side to side, dealing with irritated customers. Some were answered quickly, others seemed to be ignored. Among them, Ryan Caldwell, an impeccable posture manager and careful look, watched the movement and decided, almost without realizing it, who deserved more attention. For him, money often spoke louder than the urgency of problems. And that day, Eleanor Carter did not seem like a priority. She took a deep breath before taking a step forward. Her heart was hitting rapid, not just for the financial concern, but the feeling of being at the mercy of a system that didn't always care about people like her. Finally, she arrived at the counter where Sophia Hayes, a young and visibly tired attendant, typed something quickly on the computer. "Good afternoon, lady. How can I help her?" said Sophia without taking her eyes off the screen. Eleanor squeezed the envelope against his chest and moistened his lips before responding. "Good afternoon. I'm here because my account has some charges that I believe are wrong. I brought everything I got to try to understand what happened." Only then, Sophia looked at her, but her gaze was indifferent. He took the envelope with disinterest and began to leaf it without haste. "Let's see. Ah, it's here," he murmured, as if it were just another matter unimportant. But Eleanor had no idea what was yet to come. What seemed like a simple bank conversation would soon become a moment of great humiliation, and something totally unexpected was about to happen. "These charges are normal, ma'am. They are all listed in their contract," said Sophia Hayes, pushing the envelope back to Eleanor Carter. She felt her chest squeeze, his fingers shake slightly as he held the paper. "But I can't afford these tariffs. There must be some error. I was never informed about these values." Sophia let out a discreet sigh, crossing her arms. Her gaze denounced impatience, and a little ironic smile came on her lips before she rolled her eyes. Some people around them realized and exchanged glances. "Madam, you may not understand how things work today. Banks have well-defined policies. These rates are automatic. There is nothing I can do." The cold tone and the condescending way Sophia spoke made Eleanor feel a knot in her throat. She swallowed dry, trying to keep the composure. "Your mind spinned. I needed that resolved. I just want what is fair." The attendant arched an eyebrow and released a slight laughter through the nose. "Fair? Lady, if you want to avoid rates, you need to keep a bigger balance in the account. This is how it works." The surrounding whispers increased. Eleanor felt his eyes on her. Some were of indifference, others of judgment. Her eyes burned, but she refused to shed tears. Before I could insist, firm steps echoed through the bank. Ryan Caldwell, the manager, walked to the counter with his impeccable posture. Her gaze settled in Sophia, who quickly adjusted her posture, as if she wanted to look more professional. "Any problem here?" he asked, crossing his arms. Sophia smiled nervously and shook her head. "Nothing, sir. Only a client trying to understand the policies of the account." Eleanor squeezed the envelope between his fingers. "Not just that. I believe there was an error in my account. I'm just trying to solve it." The manager lifted his hand, interrupting it. "Madam, if there was a mistake, perhaps it was not for reading the contract closely before opening your account." "Everything is very clear for those who pay attention." She felt indignation grow. "I always kept my account in order. These charges came out of nowhere. All I ask is that someone reviews it." Ryan sketched a cold smile. "Review? Madame, what is in the system is in the system. We do not review what is automatic." The weight of his words fell on her like a sledgehammer. The way he spoke, it made him feel insignificant. He looked around, seeking support in some look, but found only neutral faces. Some people looked away, others whispered with each other. The manager leaned slightly forward. "If you can't afford these tariffs, maybe this bank is not the right place for you." That phrase echoed in his mind. She opened her mouth to answer, but the shame and helplessness made it difficult to find words. His eyes fell on the envelope in his hands. All I wanted was simple, understanding what happened and correcting the error. But at that moment, she realized that for Ryan Caldwell, she was just a nuisance. The silence on the bench was interrupted by a firm and clear voice. "Why are you talking to her that way?" The environment has froze. All the heads turned to see who had spoken. In the middle of the bench, a man wearing a casual jacket and a baseball cap had approached without drawing much attention. He had been there for some time, watching the scene. Now I decided to intervene. The employees exchanged uncertain glances. Eleanor lifted his head and found the look of the unknown. Ryan Caldwell turned slowly, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "And who are you to ask what is happening here?" The man took a few more steps ahead and with a calm movement withdrew the cap. It was at this moment that a murmur crossed the room. People looked at each other, some wide their eyes. "Wait, is he?" The tension in the environment was replaced by a collective shock. The figure before them was not an ordinary man. It was Dwayne Johnson. "No matter who I am," said Dwayne Johnson with a firm but controlled tone. "What matters is why you're treating this lady like that." Eleanor Carter looked at him, still trying to soothe what was happening. He never imagined that someone like him would be there, defending her in a situation like that. Ryan Caldwell took a deep breath, trying to recover control. "Mr. Johnson, I didn't know the Lord was here." "But you see, it does not concern the Lord. We have policies in this bank, and this client does not meet the requirements." An ironic smile came on Dwayne's face. Policies? Or just an excuse to humiliate someone who's trying to solve a legitimate problem? The whole bank watched in silence. Sophia Hayes, who once showed confidence, now she launched nervous looks at Ryan, hoping that he would say something that could get around the situation. Dwayne turned to Eleanor, speaking in a milder tone. "Madam, can you show me what's going on?" She hesitated for a moment, but extended the envelope to him. Dwayne took the papers carefully and began to analyze them. After a few seconds, he looked up and looked straight at Ryan. "This is a mistake," he said. "These charges should not be here." The manager tried to argue, but Dwayne raised his hand, interrupting him. "If this is an error, you will correct it now. If not, then we have an even bigger problem." The silence on the bench became deafening. No one expected someone like Dwayne Johnson to get involved that way. But he was not over. He put the envelope over the counter and fixed his gaze on Ryan. "I want you to review it immediately. And I don't leave here until this situation is resolved." The manager looked speechless, but what he didn't know was that Dwayne was beginning to see something much bigger than just a mistake in Eleanor Carter's account. Ryan Caldwell adjusted the visibly uncomfortable shirt. He looked at Sophia, who looked as lost as he. Neither knew what to say, but Dwayne was not willing to wait. He retreated a little, without losing his firmness in his posture. "The problem here is not just a mistake, is it? The problem is how you treat customers who deserve respect. And from what I saw, this is far from happening." Sophia tried to intervene, her voice a little trembling. "Mr. Johnson, you may not understand how the system works. We follow rigid rules." He interrupted her again with education, but with no room for excuses. "Rigid rules. I understand enough to know that these tariffs are arbitrary. And I also know that you have the autonomy to correct them." Eleanor intertwined his fingers, still afraid about all that. Dwayne looked at her and smiled in a tranquilizing way. "Don't worry. We will solve this." Everyone on the bench accompanied it in silence. No employee seemed to know how to react. No clients dared to interrupt. Dwayne took the envelope again and turned to Ryan. "These charges started 2 months ago, right?" Eleanor nodded. His voice almost failed. "Yes." He turned his attention to the manager. "And tell me, why did these maintenance rates triple? There seems to be no real justification here." Ryan tried to find an answer, but Dwayne raised an eyebrow, making it clear that any excuse would be dismantled at the same time. "Choose your words well," he warned, "because if this is something bigger than a mistake, you and this bank will have a very serious problem in hand." The tension spread through the environment. Once indifferent staff now seemed restless. Ryan Caldwell realized that he could no longer escape. He took a deep breath and retreated, avoiding Dwayne's gaze. I need to revise this in the system," he said, deviating to a nearby computer. Dwayne crossed her arms. "So, start now." Eleanor watched the scene, still surprised by everything that was happening. The manager triggered frantically, trying to access the records. Beside him, Sophia seemed uncomfortable, his shaking hands as he watched the screen. What once seemed like a common mistake was beginning to take much higher proportions. After a few minutes, Ryan stopped typing. His eyes were fixed on the monitor. He paled. "Mr. Johnson," he said hesitantly. Dwayne leaned lightly forward. What it was, Ryan swallowed dry before finally admitted. "It seems that these charges have been applied to various accounts, especially from elderly customers." The silence on the bench got even denser. Dwayne stepped back, processing the information. "This is not a mistake. This is a scheme." The eyes on the bench crossed. Eleanor Carter was not the only victim, and Dwayne Johnson knew it was just beginning to find out the extent of this problem. Ryan Caldwell was pale. His eyes ran the computer screen, but he already knew there was no way out. The system exposed what he tried to hide, his chair ranges as he retreated nervously. "Mr. Johnson, I swear it was a system mistake," he said, his trembling voice. "We didn't do it on purpose." Dwayne Johnson kept her look firm without being carried away by the excuse. "A system error? What convenient. And why does this error only affect the elderly accounts? Did you think no one would notice?" Eleanor Carter's eyes were wide. "So I'm not the only one? How many people did you deceive?" The weight of the question fell on the room. Sophia Hayes, next to the manager, seemed paralyzed. His face denounced that he knew more than he was willing to admit. Ryan opened his mouth to answer, but his voice failed. I need to investigate. I need more time to understand this." Dwayne approached slowly, resting her hands on the counter. "Time? You have had enough time. Now tell the truth." The silence extended. The manager ran a hand over the sweaty forehead and threw a desperate look at Sophia. She hesitated for a moment, but, in the face of pressure, finally gave way. "We don't know exactly how many, but it can be hundreds." The shock crossed the room. Dwayne straightened the posture. "This is not a mistake. This is a blow." The whispers began among customers. Ryan knew there was no more room for lies. He sank in the chair, defeated. It was then that Dwayne took her cell and phone and started recording. "What you are listening to now is the confession of a bank manager. A bank that is charging unfair fees to increase your profits." The manager raised his hands in despair. "Wait! Please, do not do that. I can solve right now." Dwayne lowered her cell phone slightly, but her voice was still firm. "Solve? This is not just about returning money. This is about respect, about dignity." Ryan leaned forward, his expression taken by fear. "What do you want from me?" Dwayne approached once more, looking straight at him. "I want you to correct this for each person who was affected. And I want the authorities to know exactly what happened here." The manager lowered his head, defeated. He knew there was no escape. That same afternoon, the bank issued an official statement promising a complete investigation and immediate changes. Ryan Caldwell and Sophia Hayes were removed from their positions, and an audit began identifying all harmed customers. Eleanor Carter, who had arrived there, received more than a simple refund. The bank had to return each penny and even paid compensation for the damage caused. A bank spokeswoman appeared before the press, visibly uncomfortable. "We apologize for this unacceptable situation. We are taking all measures to correct the problem." At the end of the day, Eleanor looked at Dwayne Johnson, his teary eyes. "I would never have gotten it without you. Thank you for believing in me." He smiled slightly. "You should never have gone through this. But now it's not just about you. Other people will also receive justice." While Eleanor left the bench, something in her seemed different. There were still marks of the humiliation he suffered, but above that, there was a new force. Dwayne watched customers who once just watched silent. Now they were attentive, aware of what had happened. He turned to everyone and spoke clearly. "Never let anyone say that you are worth less. Whoever, anyone, deserves respect." The bank remained silent for a moment before a sound echoed in the environment. Palms. The next day, Dwayne Johnson's video denouncing the bank's blow viralized. Millions watched, and the scandal took on gigantic proportions. The bank was investigated, and many victims began to receive their money back. Eleanor Carter's story is no longer just an isolated case. It became something much bigger. If this story impacted you, imagine how many others we can still tell together. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, thrill, and make a difference.